Krainer, who's a good friend and analyst. And the thing I love most about Alex is that, unlike a lot of other financial analysts and commentators, he has a solid grasp of history. And how do you know you can trust somebody's judgment? Well, to the degree that they've really internalized the lessons of the drama of history, will give the mind an ability to always map out context and then pass judgment according to discoverable principles of what is shaping the wave that brought us into the present. What is it that the financier oligarchy that does exist, that has existed for a very long time, what is it that not only do they want, but what is it that they're afraid of? What are the weak spots? And when when I started reading Alex's historical works, citing people like Carroll Quigley, I realized, okay, this guy's good. He's onto something, and he takes Quigley seriously. The importance right now is we are coming into a point of turbulence, the likes of which most people don't get to experience in many generations. I don't think humanity has ever experienced something of this magnitude. And with that comes also a lot of potential for good as well. There's a lot of points where people can reevaluate their false assumptions through crisis, which they would not have been able to do if times were more stable or comfortable. So there's a certain goodness that could arise by self-examination. But at the same measure, there's also a lot of danger. Alex has returned a couple of weeks ago. He was speaking at a Eurasian integration conference. There's a lot to go through. I mean, Alex's blog is The Naked Hedgie. He is a hedge fund manager. He's written an incredible best-selling book on Bill Browder called The Grand Deception, which we'll make available in the description box. I think everyone should read this. Alex, thank you for taking the time. I think what we'll do is just have a few opening remarks from you, and then we'll have a dialogue with the audience. I know we only have about an hour and a bit, so let's make the best of it.
Brilliant. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Matthew, thank you for the invitation, and my warm greetings to all the participants and all the viewers. So basically, yes, I would fully agree with you that we have come to a really, really important juncture in humanity's evolution and history. I think we've come to a final clash between two models of governing. This is precisely what George Soros has said during his presentation at the last Davos gathering. Basically, he pretty much said it, that what we're facing is a clash between two models of governance. Of course, he calls one the open societies versus the closed societies, pretending that the open societies, which is Western democracies, is the light, and that the closed societies, the autocracies and tyrannies of the East, are the darkness. I wouldn't agree that far with George Soros, but definitely that we're witnessing a clash of two models of governance. As Matthew has said, this progression has been evolving for centuries. I think it goes at least as far back as the 13th century Venice, but it probably goes farther than that as well. And I think that the greatest factor shaping this conflict is our monetary system, which has evolved from those roots in Venice. There are two elements to it that are toxic to human society. One is the fractional reserve banking, and the other one is fiat currency system. The fractional reserve banking means that banks can extend more credit than they actually have loss absorbing assets on their books. And fiat currency means that the money that we use today is backed by nothing but debt. Through history, and maybe it'll be too much to go into a discussion of causes and reason, but two things emerge about this system of this monetary system of fractional reserve banking with fiat currency, is that it's extremely crisis prone. So fractional reserve system generates artificial purchasing power, where the bankers accept deposits, once upon a time gold, and then lend out this gold, because they quickly learned that most people, when they deposit their gold to a place which they felt was secure, they leave it there for a very long time. And so if the bankers lend it out, nobody's the wiser. The effect of it is that it adds purchasing power into an economic system. It makes people more entrepreneurial. It makes them feel more prosperous. And so for a time, this system kind of mobilizes the creative abilities that exist in the population, and makes everybody think that they are better off, which in reality they are. The problem is that about half the time when you operate with this system, it causes deep crises. And once upon a time, this would manifest itself simply in bank failures, because when people felt that the bank is giving out their gold, and that if they want to redeem their gold, that it might not be there, you had bank runs, and banks would regularly fail. The banks would regularly fail under bank runs. And then we had the advent of central banking, which has pretty much become the standard from the early 20th century across the world. And central banks are now in the position to bail out individual banks, so we don't see bank runs so much anymore. But this measure has not removed the root causes of the crises. So as we experience now, we are in the crisis. This is not a new experience. This monetary system has been crisis prone, and through probably half of the history with this system, economies have been through crises, depressions, recessions, bankruptcies, bank failures, and so forth. Sometimes with extremely tragic consequences. World wars have followed banking crises. When the Lombard banking system failed in the 14th century Italy, the year after that, there was the Black Plague, which swept across the continent and killed about a third of to 40% of the European population. Another thing that goes along with this banking system is war. So there's a dynamic associated with this banking system that causes societies to be very warlike, not because individuals in the society enjoy going to war, but because of the perverse incentives that exist in the system. And I'll try to summarize this, even though, you know, the argument is a little bit complex. But basically, if you regard an economic system as a system which produces over a period of time certain amount of goods and services, all the costs that are associated with production of these goods and services, plus the entrepreneur's profits, represents the purchasing power that is available in the system to purchase all the goods and services that have been produced. So for this system to be in equilibrium, the purchasing power, the prices attached to all the goods and services should match exactly the available purchasing power that's in the system. And then all the businesses, all the entrepreneurs could sell their goods to the public, receive the prices they expect, and everybody's doing fine. Now, what happens is that this is never really the case, because people like to save some money for the rainy day. And we see that throughout, even in crises and with prosperity, regardless, the people always retain a certain percentage of their discretionary income and set it aside for a rainy day. Now that means if they do this, that the aggregate purchasing power that's available in the system will no longer be sufficient for all the businesses and entrepreneurs to sell their wares to the public at the prices that they expected and wanted. So that means that they will have to lower the prices. That means that some of them might even have to curtail production, lay off some workers. Some businesses, mathematically, a percentage of businesses and people will go bankrupt, which will further reduce the purchasing power that's available in the system, which will then further reduce production and output of goods. And so what you get is a self-reinforcing cycle that the economists call colloquially the deflationary death spiral. And savings are not the only feature that is leading to this. There's also the fact that all the money that's in circulation is essentially reflects debt. As businesses generate their revenues, they also pay off their debts on a regular schedule. When you pay debt, you retire money. Money disappears, right? Because the money in the circulation only represents debt. It's no longer gold. It's no longer silver. It's not any kind of commodity. It's only debt. So when you repay your debt, that amount of money is taken out of the system. It just disappears. So for this, as I mentioned, for the system to be in equilibrium, the aggregate spending should match exactly the aggregate costs and expenses and entrepreneurs' profits. But the system actually needs to grow to be in balance. Why? Because exactly because of this fact that money is being retired. The money that's put into circulation reflects debt. It has to be paid back with interest. The amount of interest never goes into circulation. So the only way somebody who takes on debt could repay their debt plus interest, it can only be done if other people also take on debt so that there's more money in the system and more purchasing power. Now this never works. That is, it works for a little while. You prime the engine, it goes for a little while, usually a period of 7 to 10 years, and then inevitably, you know, the cycle of prosperity, and you know, everybody gets a home, everybody gets a car, everybody has nice clothes, and so the spending of all this prosperity levels off, and at that point, the system either stagnates or begins to go into a recession. And so to offset this, inevitably governments have to step in and to pump this supplemental purchasing power into the system to keep it from entering that deflationary death spiral. Because if you let that process unwind itself completely, the economy would eventually stabilize only at a depression level of activity. And what happens at that point is that as banks step in to add purchasing power into the system, choices have to be made. How do we do this? And so you have many choices. You know, you can build libraries and schools and universities and hospitals. You can just distribute money to the people. You can build monuments. You know, you can build pyramids, for example. You can spend money on space programs, and so on and so forth. Basically, goods that don't enter the market. Now, a lot of these, or also you can invest into infrastructures like roads and bridges and high speed railways and so forth. Unfortunately, all of these good productive ideas tend to run into ideological headwinds, because in the Western societies, we don't want governments involved in the economic activity at all, because everybody knows that governments don't do that well, that they're inefficient, corrupt, unprofitable, and so forth. So people practically, as a knee-jerk reaction, reject that. One thing that everybody can agree on usually, and if they don't agree on it, that they can always be bludgeoned into submission morally, is national security and national defense. So, you can always contrive reasons why we should be afraid of a certain external enemy. We can always project their power to the minds of the populace, and we can always say, "Wow, we need bigger weapons. We need more money. We need more money in the weapons industries, in the military, and so forth." So you get this metastasizing military-industrial complex, which also then over time becomes wealthy and powerful enough where they can even, control and co-opt and even outright own the media. The media do their job to keep the people afraid of external enemies, and so we always have external enemies. We always have people to be afraid of, somebody who's threatening us from abroad. And so the system gets to this point where you have a permanent state of war, where the military industry is absolutely gargantuan. Madmen and enemies abroad are just one following the other. This has a succession that spans decades. So, the public can always be, the wars can always be justified by presenting like, oh, Slobodan Milosevic is a monster, we have to go bomb Serbia. Saddam Hussein is a monster, we have to save his people from him, and so we go to war to Iraq. The Taliban are monsters, we have to go into Afghanistan, and Gaddafi is a monster, we have to go into Libya. And so one thing after another, these wars are always duly explained and justified to the American people. But the fact is that wars are always on. It's just one thing after another. And if you peel back the onion of where this comes from, because it clearly doesn't come from the inclinations of the American people, who always vote for anti-war candidates but always end up getting more war. If you peel that onion all the way back to its seed, it goes back to the monetary system with an element of the cultural inclination, because it's not, a country, again, a country could choose to spend that extra purchasing power on pyramids or infrastructure or education or just leisure, if you like. It doesn't have to be always war, but certain cultural inclinations make war the irresistible option. So we have a systemic addiction to war, and hardly anyone analyzing why that is so and how we can end it. And my contention is that we can only end it by completely overhauling the monetary system, and in fact overhauling the entire operating system of the Western societies. The alternative of staying on this path and maintaining the status quo is total destruction, and we are going in that direction. I think that fortunately, Western powers have now encountered a worthy enemy, a worthy adversary, and so that gravy train stops. And so I would leave it at that, because then we can go into what happens after the gravy train stops, and are the ruling powers that be aware of that, and what are their contingencies to deal with this prospect and to mitigate the crisis. And I'll just make the suggestion that they have to introduce a new monetary system, and to make that monetary system stick, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and to make that monetary system stick, they need a matrix of total control of their own population. That's where the pandemic comes in, and so on and so forth. But basically, if we passively acquiesce to everything that's coming our way, we will gift our children and their children a future and a life that's not worth living. So we have no option to acquiesce, because it's on somebody else's. It's going to affect our children and our grandchildren. All right, so thank you, and I would leave it at that, and then maybe we can go into more interesting topics in the discussion.
Absolutely, yes. And thank you for those very, very poignant and very, very important remarks. And I think that's a great place to end it in an open way. Pascal, I know, has a question which feeds directly off of the points that you just made towards your closing remarks. I'll just ask everybody again, please put your names in the chat box. Try to be as concise as you can, since we only have maybe 45, 50 minutes left. Pascal, go for it. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Mr. Krainer, for your remarks. I listened to the Rogue News show where you intervened also with Matthew, and that was a very interesting discussion. I've been thinking since I've seen that show that, as you mentioned, right now our system is broken, and so there is no correlation between reality, the state of the physical economy, and our financial system and the financial tools that are used to try to prop it up. We're running into a very huge crisis. When I look at the news, coming from Europe, I don't think that they're gonna have a very good Christmas period or a very good winter due to the energy crisis that's coming. But on top of that, you also have the food crisis. My question is more regarding that new system. Since we need a new system, I would go back to, after World War II, we had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which were signed by the victors of the war. We seem to be in a war right now also, but the victors are not the ones that maybe we would have hoped, or as change side in the world. So I don't see the West as being the ones that can actually bring forth a new system, even though they are on the failing side and would need one. Do you see that a new Bretton Woods system would be more of the prerogative of Russia and China and the Eurasian bloc right now? And how do you think that could work?
Well, it seems to me that Russia and China have been actively working on creating something along those lines, like a new Bretton Woods system, for quite a while now, and they've also been, I think pretty much since June they've announced that system is coming. I don't know when exactly, but it's a very interesting thing to observe, because one thing I learned about that is that Russian and Chinese diplomats have been signaling to their potential partners, nations who might come into this system, that they would not be penalizing them for defaulting on their obligations to the Western financial institutions, and they would not be penalizing them for nationalizing their national industries and resources. And now, last week, we've seen that Burkina Faso has actually begun the process of nationalizing their natural resources and their mining industries. And so, this is a development that I don't believe that we will see much about in the news cycle, at least not in the Western media. But it's coming well, for the reason for that is because it accelerates the financial crisis in the West, because the control over, let's say, Burkina Faso's gold mines and zinc mines and copper mines and so forth actually represents collateral on the books of Western banks. Losing that collateral, losing access and control of that collateral, is moving those banks closer to failure, and they're already well on their way to failing. So it's a question of how much longer they can be bailed out. And I think that the only way that you can bail them out is just by printing fiat to paper over the bad debts of these failing corporations and the holes that are materializing on the books of the banks. And that only leads to one outcome, and is the collapse of the currency through hyperinflation. So that's the direction in which the West is moving. Now, who is the West? We today have certain leaders in power, but that doesn't mean that they'll be in power 6 months from now or a year from now. And the West is actually us. And we don't have to passively sit and watch and wait what our exalted leaders are going to do. We have problems to address. Among other things, we have to figure out how we're going to exchange services among each other when money no longer comes out of the ATMs. And generally, people have been very inventive, very creative in addressing those problems and finding solutions. During the Depression, during the Weimar inflation in Germany 100 years ago, alternative local and regional currencies have popped up like mushrooms all over the place, because people just simply needed them, and so they came up with them, bottom up. But we have to be prepared that such measures to mitigate crises will be necessary, and then we'll probably have to defend our right to grow our food, because they clearly want us to eat a diet of insects, and they want to, they pretty much laid it out in the open that they want to phase out cattle farming, lamb, and other kinds of farming in favor of insects and whatnot.
The old adage, fate leads the willing and the unwilling drags. So hopefully the unwilling technocrats who are part of this death cult might be dragged into a better orientation. Maybe that won't necessarily transform their hearts, but at least force them to behave according to some standards that are in conjunction with actual humanity. So we'll see. Got a question here from Peter. Peter, you're next on the list. You're also on mute. Sorry. Everyone's on mute.
Unmuted. Alex, I have a question that addresses Croatian history. Was the U.S. NATO support of Croatia in Kraina in 1995 a precursor for the U.S. NATO support of Ukraine in 2014 through 2022, or even more properly, before 2014? More importantly, what did the U.S. and NATO learn from Kraina that they are directly applying in Ukraine at the present?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for that question. It's an extremely interesting question, and I don't think that the parallels are quite appropriate, because NATO did support Croatia in 1995, but when the war broke out in 1991, they didn't. There was like a 180-degree turnabout, because initially they wanted to keep Yugoslavia as one nation, as their client, controlled through Belgrade. But most of the republics wanted to. Well, we wanted initially a confederation. We were denied that. In 1991, the war broke out because first Slovenia, then Croatia, then Bosnia, then others declared their independence. The authorities in Belgrade were signaled by the U.S. administration that they support the lawful government and that they support Yugoslavia as a single country. So Yugoslavian army attacked, and then we had a frozen conflict, not for 8 years, but for about 4 years. And Krainer, about 35% of Croatia, was occupied by the Serbian forces. And then political changes happened, and then there was obviously a change of heart. Croatia obviously offered itself as a better client to the West, and so they supported us in reconquering those 35%. But Croatia, neither Croatia nor Yugoslavia, while they had some strategic significance, occupying the western coast of the Adriatic, we didn't have such very, very high strategic importance, because Ukraine is actually the ideal staging ground for dragging Russia into a quagmire and weakening Russia, and then maybe hopefully leading to a regime change in Moscow. I think that our part of the world never had such critical importance for them. So they played it one way, then they changed their mind, then they played it another way. What was actually behind all that, I have to tell you, because I even participated in that war as a Croatian soldier. The similarity is that we probably felt like the Ukrainians now that we were fighting for our freedoms, even though the puppet masters were all in London and in Washington. So there are some similarities, but it's a very, very different. Very, very different kind of war.
Thank you very much.
Faisal? You have to just unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks for that, Matt. Alex, pleasure to meet you online. It's Faisal from Canada. We've
Hi, Faisal.
Exchanged some emails. So thanks again for the. Yeah, it's the same guy.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for those emails. I really enjoyed reading them.
Okay, I'm glad, and nice to be able to connect with you. So, great explanation on the deflationary gap. It's the second time I've heard you explain it, so it's actually sinking in deeper into the brain cells. So the BRICS and Sergei Glaziev, they're talking about a new monetary system that's asset-based, right?
Right.
How would an asset-based monetary system avoid a deflationary gap, if at all? And if it doesn't, what else is required in order to make it a more sustainable and less war-prone?
Well, okay, so you have several ways of dealing with deflationary gap. One of them is actually destruction of goods, and that is actually you had the cases in history where in a crisis, for example, farmers simply don't harvest their crops; they just let them rot in the field, or sometimes they're even plowed in. One of the ways of dealing with the deflationary gap is idling part of the production capacity that's available in the economy. You can also choose to produce goods that don't enter the market. Pyramids, for example. You build a pyramid, you spend a lot of money to build it, but it never goes on sale. So that purchasing power gets into the system, but it doesn't have to be matched with a purchase on the other side. And you can also, obviously build bombs and stuff, but my reading of history, which I'm not a historian, so I don't claim authority on this, but one thing that I picked up from Carol Quigley is that the Western civilization, so I'm not just talking about the Americans or even the Brits, but this whole, let's call it 500 years of history where this, fractional reserve, fraudulent banking has taken hold and has started defining relationships and incentives in a society. We have wiped out 6 major indigenous civilizations around the world, the South American ones, India, China, Japan. And we have wiped out literally thousands of smaller kingdoms, cultures, tribes that lived at a fairly high level of civilization. And we've depopulated massive swathes of the earth, to the tune of 80 or 90%, and in some cases 100%. Like the indigenous tribes that occupy the Caribbean islands no longer exist. They've been completely wiped out and replaced with African slaves. And so, again, this is not because Western Europeans are inherently evil, but because we have adopted a system that incentivizes the worst of behaviors. The Chinese and the Indians, who have been the global economic superpowers for centuries before, the Western European colonists emerged, they haven't gone around the world colonizing and depopulating other civilizations and other cultures. So there is a cultural element where, I think, we've seen Chinese build out, 30,000 kilometers of high-speed rail networks. Their military spending is still relatively insignificant. Russian military spending is relatively high, but for good reasons. But then again, they also invest in improving their society and creating productive industrial potential, improving the infrastructure and so forth. So the inclinations at the moment are different from what they are in the West. And also we see that the political leadership, both in Russia and in China, are superimposed to the corporate oligarchy. So, you have oligarchs in China, you have oligarchs in Russia, but Xi Jinping can curtail their power, and Vladimir Putin can also curtail their power. So the whole system of incentives where somebody maybe works out that war is awesome for business, so let's just buy up all the newspapers and pitch war after war after war to get more and more and more money for our the weapons industries. That dynamic hasn't yet happened in Russia or in China. And we've even seen examples where, the Chinese leadership simply removes uppity oligarchs. Jack Ma straight into criticizing the Chinese banking system, and then he disappeared. He's enjoying his wealth somewhere, but he's no longer all over media preaching about how to run things. So longer term view, just to wrap this, longer term view, I think we have to get away from this kind of monetary system at all, because it shouldn't rest on the benevolence of the people in power. We need maybe better protections from potential abuse that comes with the great privilege of being able to issue credit and allocate it and choose who gets it, who doesn't get it.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, just a simple migration to an asset-based away from a debt-based system doesn't necessarily resolve the civilization.
I don't think it does, Faisal, because until at some point in the last century, we've had gold standard. We had some,
Yeah.
variation of gold standards, and it hasn't changed much. The Spanish Empire was using gold, but it didn't change the fact that they wiped out the Aztecas and Mayas and the Incas in the south in South America. When the Bank of England was established in 1694, next 120 years, they were in 18 officially declared wars against France, which was their major rival. And then they finally took care of France through the French Revolution. But, that war dynamic was there even when the money was gold-backed. So that's not necessarily what changes the dynamic.
Right. Yeah. Fair point. Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you, Faisal.
Faisal, that was good. Yeah, and obviously the question is there. We often will look for a mechanism or formula that could solve like a magic spell all of our problems, but obviously when we look to history, that never works, and there's always a question of the cultural, moral dynamic which is shaping how society comes to its relationship with itself, right? How we shape our identities, shape our values. That's really at the heart of everything. As they say, politics and economics is downstream from culture, and I think that's what you've sort of been alluding to, Alex. Jerry, I know that you've been waiting for a while.
Yes, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Alex. That was a nice bit of fresh air discussing.
Thank you, Gerald.
And I like your idea of this self-reinforcing deflationary cycle, because I agree. You see it out there. I think the purchasing power of the average person is going down. But at the same time as we have that, we also have the growth of these like multi-billionaires, like Amazon and Elon Musk and that. And I've had like arguments with friends of mine, and see, they think, well, that shows that the economy is going great, that you can have these billionaires. It must be going good. And I say, well, I say it's not that they're so smart, they're just better thieves. It's kind of a simple explanation. But just this idea, you have this deflationary cycle, but at the same time, you have the growth of these multi-billionaires. And I was just wondering what your view, your analysis of this kind of contradiction is.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction. They're both. I think they're both symptoms of a broken system. And one thing you learn about the Western societies is that all these, well, the vast majority of all these oligarchs are not where they are because they were the cleverest, the fastest, the most creative of the lot, but because somebody in some place paved their way, and they have protection in high places. And the more you know about them, the more you realize that they were basically handed their privileges, and those privileges were handed usually in exchange for certain obligations. So Bill Gates was his father was already a relatively well-connected, powerful man. His mother was close to the board of directors of IBM when he got the contract for the DOS operating system when they launched their PC line. And so a lot of these, and he didn't invent anything. He even bought the DOS operating system from somebody else who actually wrote it. How did he know to do that? So Steve Jobs was connected in these ways. We've just seen this FTX thing collapse. It turns out that the Fried Bankman was also politically connected and handed his wealth, basically. And so none of that is a reflection of a healthy, prosperous, growing economy. It's only a reflection that the political elite, chooses winners and losers, and then these winners are also used as a prop to show you, well, you see, if you play by the rules, if you work hard, if you take risks, then you too can be a billionaire, maybe. But in fact, we also know that the social mobility in Western countries is actually very, very low, and that it's much higher in some of these other countries like China. So there's a lot of mythology. There's a lot of mythology. The presence of billionaires, and even the the march of the stock markets do not reflect the actual economy. The stock markets, the one, and this, like the deflationary gap, it took me practically all my life to work this out, even though it's once you work it out, you realize it's obvious. The main factor moving the stock markets is central bank monetary inflation. When central banks QEs, quantitative easing, right, stock markets go up. When they slow it down or contract the money supply, stock markets go down. And we have now more than a century of data showing this, that this relationship moves in parallel. And the people who are at the top of our monetary, near the top of the monetary authorities, they know this. They know this perfectly well. So they can even create authorities like Warren Buffett, because they know when to get into the markets, they know when to get out. It's unfortunately that simple. But it's not simple for the rest of us, because they never tell us these things. I studied economics. I was like the geek's geek. I took the whole thing very seriously. I tried to know everything about it. I've never heard of the deflationary gap in my university studies. And I still have my economics textbooks. They don't mention it. So certain things are definitely obscured from us. And this, facade of economic prosperity and this is contrived so that people don't rise up and say, like, this whole system doesn't work, we have to change it. You have to go along with the system. You have to work hard to contribute to it, and let them choose who wins and who doesn't.
I think part of that might have something to do with the fact that the system, under the influence of the actual political operatives that we know and have identified, have been trying to operate above the nations, above the system, often will create rules that they never themselves intended to follow, but rather know that to the degree that people are dumb enough to follow the rules of correct economic behavior, they are going to be easily controllable. So you're dealing with dishonest actors, whereby, the words free trade, other things, they sound all well and nice on the surface until you get an opium war, you get a controlled starvation or famine. And then you're like, maybe that was actually the intention. Actually, maybe that was actually the effect, because those actual agents never played or never intended to play by their own free trade rules themselves in an honest way.
Yeah, I think that's correct, man.
The next question we have here, and by the way, I got a question here for time constraint wise. You said quarter past is your absolute dead cutoff.
Yep. Well, dead cutoff. I'm not. They're not going to come for me. And but I have to. I have two small kids, 10 and 12. Yeah. They have school tomorrow morning, so I have to pack them up, make sure that they have all this stuff, and they have to be in bed early enough to.
Because we have about 8 questions. We're not going to get through them, but is it okay if I give your email address to people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat box.
I'll just say, if you don't hear from me in a few days, I do get around to answering emails eventually. But if I don't, please don't be shy about reminding me, because some slip through the oversight valve.
So we have Adria. Cora, are you still there?
Thank you. Thanks for calling on me. I'll try to be quick then. First of all, just briefly to say how much I really loved your presentation on Theranos. That was so brilliant.
Thank you.
You know, she was just sentenced on Friday
Yes.
to 11. All right. I also just wanted to quickly say, because I saw Gerald's on the phone, how much I enjoyed the Robert Frost presentation. It was amazing. My question is in regards to two items. One, you mentioned the FTX, and following that debacle, really pretty swiftly, if I'm not mistaken, the New York Federal Reserve has now launched a central bank digital currency that I think Citi and also Bank of New York Mellon and some others are also involved in this rollout. Some people have said that it's potentially this kind of, you know, Hegelian move where, you know, you introduce something in order to say like, well, you demonize the, you know, FTX as like outsider or something, you know, and then you say, well, the government is going to do a better job and it's going to be safer for you. And then so you pose the problem, then you pose the potential solution, but the solution is actually the problem. Relative to that, President Trump is someone, or ex-President Trump is someone who I just don't understand. I'm not a supporter nor a critic. I'm just confused about him. But in general, I know that he has had, you know, a history of litigation with banks, with not only Deutsche Bank, but so many banks. And, you know, he comes out of this history of knowing the tax code. His father played the tax code. He won't reveal his taxes. He's now somehow intimated in a speech, or so it was reported in the Epoch Times yesterday, that his son Eric has now ceased becoming a citizen of the United States and is now like a citizen of the state of New York or potentially Florida, and is maybe not going to pay taxes. You know, there's this apparent movement now to try to get around being a citizen of the United States Inc., like an incorporation of the United States, to become not a
question.
It's a fascinating article. Matthew, I think you could also speak to this. The article is November 19th in the New York Times, in the Epoch Times. The USA Inc. reporter exposes how America was hijacked, turned into a corporation during the Civil War. And it really focuses on this person. She's a 55-year-old reporter, and she's chairman of the Zelenko Freedom Foundation. That's Dr. Zelenko, who passed away recently. Her name is Ann Vandersteel, and she's talking about how she gave up her own U.S. citizenship to become a state. She now doesn't pay taxes and what have you. So, you know, Trump also just recently announced his candidacy. These things are happening concurrently, and I think it needs to be mentioned that the Bank of New York is now, you know, 40 Wall Street is the Trump building. So I don't really know how to put all of these things together, if there is any kind of connecting any of these things, but it seems like everything's happening at once in this whirlwind. I would love to hear your comments on it.
Thank you, Adria. Look, to be honest, I don't really know what to make of all this. I'm aware of Ms. Vandersteel, right? And I know that she's the chairman of the Zelenko Foundation, and I know that there's this movement of using these laws of admiralty to, you know, that the United States has been hijacked, that it's been turned into a corporation. I think this is broadly, you know, correct, but I think it flies over too many people's heads. I mean, you know, if you go to court and you prove these things, and then what happens? Nothing. I think, in my mind, nothing really happens, and the world goes on. There's no law without law enforcement, and so who's going to enforce these things? I don't know. But I do think that it's probably a good thing that people are re-examining these arrangements, that they are unearthing the plumbing under the system, because when it crumbles, we have to replace it with something. So we have to be aware of what's under the hood. Trump, like you, I don't exactly know how to read him, but after 4 years of his presidency, I've learned to give him the benefit of the doubt, because a lot of the things that he has done that on the surface appearance of it seemed dumb or disappointed, ultimately proved much more interesting than that. And I think that one thing that he has been doing consistently is he has been rolling back the empire. He has been extricating the United States from being the military muscle of the empire. And so, he cannot come out openly and say that, because he will turn everyone into his enemy. Like all the banks and all the corporations are the stakeholders in this empire. So he cannot say it out loud and openly. But when he launches a rocket attack on Syria, informs the Russians an hour in advance, and then all these rockets fall on an empty parking lot, or not even all of them, but half of them, and the other half never even reaches the target. Minimal damage. So he gives a bone to the military industrial complex and all the cold warriors who say like, oh yeah, now he's finally presidential, but ultimately nothing changed, nothing happened. He tried to take US troops from out of Syria, from out of Afghanistan, from out of Germany even. He was unable to do that, but he did try. So anyway, long story short, I give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and I just wanted to interject. He also, if I'm not mistaken, professed his admiration for Andrew Jackson, whom I'm learning was the last president to actually pay down the debt.
Yeah, but I think that he, it's thanks to Matthew Ehret, among others, that I learned not to admire Andrew Jackson quite as much as I used to.
That question, Andrea. Monty has been waiting for a bit. Monty, go for it. And again, we'll have to keep the questions dense, short, punchy. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alex. Very quickly, there's still a lot of back and forth on this Andrew Jackson thing, and central banking versus a national bank. Often the two are conflated. But my question, I've heard the argument made that a strict gold standard, resumption of a Species Act, would restrict the government from being able to issue credit, as opposed to a gold reserve standard, which we used to have, which would still maintain our ability of the government to stabilize the currency somewhat, and yet not restrict the ability of the United States to issue credit for infrastructure projects and productivity. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I don't know that that's where it's at, because the United States, if it wants to issue credit for construction of infrastructure, for example, they can issue the government bonds. They can print the currency. It doesn't have to be even backed by anything. It can be backed by the future by the value of the future infrastructure. So whether you're on 100% gold standard or partial gold, gold exchange standard or gold reserve standard, isn't necessarily, those are various levels of restriction on government, or better yet, banking abuse of the system. Like if you're on a full gold standard, it's very hard to abuse the system, but they would nevertheless. If you're on a gold exchange standard, it's easier to abuse the systems, and they will even more. And if you're on a total fiat system, then they'll abuse it even more. But that's not necessarily where you would shut down or disable or disincentivize abuse. I think that the disincentivizing abuse needs to come from the decision about not how much credit is created, but what it's created for.
Very good. Adam Sedia, are you still there? Adam,
Yes,
can you
I
hear me?
Yes, I am. Real quick, I know we just touched on it very briefly, but I've been following this FTX scandal with a lot of interest, particularly with the using investor funds which in former days were sacrosanct as a slush fund. And it reminds me of the MF Global collapse from 10 some odd years ago. I was just wondering if you had more thoughts about that and how it impacts the larger picture you talked about.
Thank you, Adam. I don't necessarily have a very strong opinion of that, except that, you know, we're clearly going from scandal to scandal to scandal to scandal, and it's not. Yeah, you recalled well the MF Global, but there were others. You know, there was the Theranos, there was the WorldCom, Enron, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns. It's just one thing after another. You know, the abuse of the system has been made possible also by the gutting of the SEC Regulation and Enforcement Agency during the Bush Jr. administration. You know, they practically took out all the financial fraud investigators. I think that they reduced it from 100 people to maybe 3 people. They chose the 3 least competent ones. And so, you know, there hasn't been much enforcement. There hasn't been much regulation. We knew that from the Bernie Madoff scandal that, you know, I forget the gentleman's name, but somebody who has extensively documented the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme and tried again and again to get the SEC to investigate and to put an end to that fraud. They basically ignored him and let the fraud carry on. So yeah, the government structures have been made. Markopoulos, thank you very much. Harry Markopoulos blew the whistle on Bernie Madoff well in advance of the Ponzi scheme imploding, but he was ignored, and Bernie Madoff wasn't able to carry on. And Bernie Madoff had his banking contacts that also pretending like they couldn't work out that anything was amiss, and they continued to cooperate. The system is rife with corruption and abuse, and you know, it's not whether we have, you know, the money is gold backed or not. You know, the system needs rigorous regulation and very tough enforcement. The Chinese execute their bankers, and you know, I'm not in favor of a death penalty, but there should be 100% expropriation and very long prison sentences. As it is in the Western world, no white-collar worker goes to prison except a few individuals here and there, the proverbial heads to roll to, you know, make people go to sleep again to pretend that, you know, somebody was punished and now everything is good.
Thank you.
Faucia is asking me to write or to read aloud the question. Or Faucia, would you like to ask your own question, or do you want me to read it for you? You're on mute.
Hi, I just got home, so coming from Zurich to my house. I have another question now because conversation is so interesting that, let me just turn on the light. I just wanted to ask about the whole gold standard and not gold standard, because Alex mentioned like the Spanish Empire and how they went to South America and basically eliminated all the tribes there. But the question is, how did they even get that far? Because I think all those empires needed loans to even take on these undertakings, and they were basically, all this is basically usury. And I think most of these people, most of you, I mean, I'm a Muslim, so in the Quran it says Allah has made war on usury and he's allowed commerce. So when usury comes into the equation, which is, you know, charging interest, that leads to another thing, which leads to another, and that takes us basically to the situation that we're in now. So most religions in their origins forbade usury. So all these kings and empires, they all had to borrow on usury, and Shakespeare made a very good play on that. So what are Alex's views on this observation?
Hi, Fauzia. Thank you for the question. That's actually a fascinating area, and I've been kind of working gradually to work all that out. So I know that you know, Ferdinand and Isabella, the kings of Spain, that were Habsburgs, they were basically third-rate nobility from some region of Spain. They were actually not very wealthy at all. They were not even able to afford the cost of their wedding. That was covered by bankers from, I think, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, like that. I think maybe Jacob Fugger was one of the bankers who brought Isabella and Ferdinand to power. And then, you know, they began to fund these adventurers who were sailing across the ocean into South America, and they did what they did there. Plundered tremendous amounts of gold and silver, put the locals into slavery to, you know, extract more gold and silver where they thought they could find it, and basically ended up wiping out those civilizations. The king and queen of Spain were the creation of the bankers. And the thing that fascinates me about that period is that I actually couldn't work out how that could happen, not because of the usury, which you're absolutely correct to point out, but, you know, it's the thing I found. There was, you know, like in the Middle Ages in Italy, there was this discussion about usury, what's usury, what's not usury, and the bankers would always find loopholes and ways to go around it. They would create these complicated trading contracts where, you know, they ended up charging usury, but making it look like it was margins on exchange of goods between, you know, whatever, Turkey and Venice and England and Bruges and you know, different ports around the Mediterranean. It's not only the usury that's problem, it's the fractional banking that's also the problem. Because, you know, like, it's one thing if you ask me, Alex, can you lend me $100? And I say, like, sure, Fauzia, here's $100, please pay me back 110 next year. So that's usury. But what if I go to my printer and I print $100 and give it to you, and I say, just return me $100 in a year from now? You know, both are problematic, but I think the fractional reserve banking is even more problematic than usury. You know, either case, yes, that creates a cascading system of incentives that then make these desperate adventurers go and do things that they would never do in their own community, but they can do it, you know, somewhere across the ocean because maybe nobody would know about it. You know, they used to say there's no sin below the equator. And then that creates a dynamic of its own. And people whose morals, whose ethics don't allow them to do, will, you know, just simply not participate in it. But you'll always find in the population people who don't mind, and so they will, you know. So you had, I mean, the Spaniards for over a century and something, I think something like 250,000 Spaniards went across the ocean because, you know, there was this story about the immense wealth of the South American civilizations that was propagated deliberately through the Spanish society. in that time. And like when these galleys arrived to Spain loaded with silver and gold, people lost their minds. People went and signed up for the next expedition, and the bankers were just there, choosing who to fund and who not to fund. And the profits on these expeditions was something like, if a successful expedition would return something like 70 times return on investment. Piracy, so that drew people to the industry, and at the same time selected for people willing to do what was necessary to do, or what was expedient to do.
Thank you.
There's many creative ways to steal. Do we have time for maybe 2 more questions, Alex? What do you?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do 2 more.
2 more.
Let's do
Okay.
2 more.
All right.
Yeah.
So CJ is hosting. He's live streaming this to another channel. One of the questions came in from CJ. So CJ, do you wanna read it aloud, or do you want me to read it?
Just read it for time constraints, please.
Okay. I just gotta scroll up and find it again.
CJ.
I kind of got lost.
See, Alex.
In the
I can read it.
chats
I
here.
can go through it if you want, Matthew. It's probably quicker.
Would you? Yeah, I can't find
absolutely. So Alex, thank you for being here. And my question is that in regards to the overhaul of the financial and economic system, can that be accomplished without first the overhaul of some of the political establishments, primarily in the West, in the United States? Is that feasible at all?
No, I think that we would have to have also a political overhaul of the political system. And I think that the problem is precisely because, like in places like China and Russia, you can call them autocratic regimes. To an extent, they are. There's an authority figure at the top of the pyramid who has very robust public support, and who can guide issues in a certain way and have their trust and confidence to go along with things, even if they don't understand exactly the complexity of the issue. So in Russia you have something like 70% of the people who support Vladimir Putin approve of his job, and something less than that, but usually it's 10 to 15% less than that of people who express that they actually trust him. So they can say, like, I don't exactly understand this, but if Mr. Putin says that we should do XYZ, then let's give XYZ a chance. And then the media and the banking establishment and the rest of the government will fall into line. And if they don't, then they will be disadvantaged or whatever. They won't be able to participate in the overhaul. In the West, unfortunately, it's the people who have the vested interest in the status quo who are shaping up the narrative, the solutions, and everything else. So the political authority is actually subordinate to the economic interests. So if if the Prime Minister Liz Truss tries to push some measures that the oligarchy doesn't like, well, she's out of there. And if Donald Trump wants to implement some measures that are not to the liking of the oligarchy, well, they just steal the election, and that's that. So in the West, unfortunately, the effective control of the solutions that can be implemented and explored is in the hands of the people who have the vested interest in the status quo. And one thing we know about these people is that they will set the world on fire to keep control over their privileges rather than giving up any small part of it.
Yep. Thank you for that, Alex.
Thank you, CJ.
Stephen Doyle. Yeah. Are you there? There you are.
I'm here. Thanks, Alex. Super lecture, and I'll try to be as quick as I can.
Thank you. Hi, Stephen.
I've read a number of experts in the physical silver space, who believe that that commodity will be the Achilles heel of the current financial system. So the next Lehman's moment won't happen at FTX or Credit Suisse or Deutsche Bank. They feel it will happen when there's a massive short squeeze and all these derivatives from silver and futures contracts can't be delivered to. As part of that, there's a group on Reddit called Wall Street Silver, and it's basically a mom and pop activist type thing where everyone is dedicated to devoting as much of their personal wealth and disposable income towards buying and holding physical silver with the hope that they will drain the inventories or help drain them and cause that big short squeeze price explosion. Do you feel that silver could be the catalyst for change? And if so, do you think that this everyday person activism in Wall Street Silver is a wise thing to pursue or worthy?
Okay, so thank you for the question, Stephen. I do follow Wall Street Silver on Twitter, and I think they have very good posts. I like them. Whether silver is the silver bullet to the system, I wouldn't go that far, because I think that there could be many catalysts, and we've seen, over the last years, particularly, like we've seen many commodities go into this sharp hockey stick appreciation, and then either they kind of stay in their zone or they correct sharply. It's very hard to say. All commodities are very sensitive to liquidity conditions in the markets, and even in conditions where you have normally a strong demand for some commodity, say oil, the bottom can fall out in a very short time. So we've seen oil several times over the past 15 years crash by 70% or so, 60-70%. This happens because the whole system is very sensitive to the liquidity in the market. Commodities themselves are very small part of the financial system. You have, the market for gold, for example, which is, I think, bigger than the market for silver in terms of dollars, is, I think, about $10 trillion if you take all of it. But the shadow banking system is more than $200 trillion. So it's enough for some segment of the shadow banking system to start thinking that some asset is interesting, or that they want to get out of some asset for enormous price swings. But I do think it's a very good idea to own some physical gold and silver. And I also wouldn't suggest for people to go out and hoard it, because, there's even a mental process that goes along with it. Once you start buying something, that you start, it almost creates a thing of its own, where you want to buy more and more and more and more, and that reinforces your conviction, and your conviction pushes you to buy more, and the more you buy, the more you believe it. And at some point you want to stay like, wait a minute, let's just diversify. Let's have a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver. Let's try to have a little plot of land. Let's have a little bit in real estate. I think that it's very important to diversify. And then, whether any one single factor will prove to be the undoing of the system, I can't really say. I think too many things are coming down at the same time. So, something might trigger an acceleration in the decline, but the whole thing is rotten throughout. So, I think that holding silver is a good idea. Whether silver will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, I think it's anybody's guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And I know that we've run through the time allotment that we had. There's something like 13 other questions, and a lot of them are really good questions that I've seen. And it's unfortunate that we can't really go through them today, but everyone has Alex's email now, and they also have Alex's Substack. which are in the chat box. There'll also be in the recording of this video in the description box. So please subscribe to Alex. Feel free to pose your question to Alex. CC me as well. Love to see the Alex's answer. And if I could chime in, I'll say something useful if I can. I think, just listening to you today, Alex, it sort of reminded me a little bit of that allegory of, or the story of Noah, and how, a lot of people didn't understand what Noah was doing, and just capacity building, learning, we're in a desert. What are you learning how to build a boat for? Well, what do we need that skill set? It's like, I feel like I'm going to need it. You shouldn't be wasting your time either. You should be building capacities as well. Keep flexible. And I think we're in a situation today where people have wasted a lot of time. It's been part of the consumer society dynamic that we've adapted into. That was just, it's not necessarily our fault. That was the norms that we modulated ourselves to. It involved, again, wasting a lot of time not actualizing the mental powers that we've had endowed within us as potentials to be worked upon to develop a love for wisdom. So now's a time where we really, I think, need to take this opportunity to just immerse ourselves in, again, capacity build, learn techniques, keep flexible. And so we don't know the future exactly. We know in general, in principle, but we don't, it's a process shaped by functions like free will. There's ideas, good and bad, that are warring it out right now. And we don't know what type of opportunities are going to emerge in the future that we may or may not be ready to respond to, depending upon the work that we did or didn't do on ourselves and on our networks, our family, our friends, and beyond, to prepare for such opportunities. So I think, we can't waste any time at this point. And so just the fact that we spent our valuable Sunday afternoon, a couple hours here today, gathering and cultivating that pursuit of wisdom, I think is a really good use of time. And hopefully we continue that on. I know next week we have a friend in the Netherlands who's going to go through a new look at China. Frans van der Bosch is an academic, a historian, and he's published a lot of books. He's going to go through an analysis of China that I think is rare and refreshing for people in the West. We're going to have Joaquin going through something in 2 weeks' time, and a lot more planned down the pipeline. So, Alex, thank you again so much, and thank you everyone for coming by today.
Thank you all for the time and for listening. And my apologies that I had to cut this short. I'm a single father of two, and I have this schedule of, one week I'm on a tight ship, and 1 week I'm free as a bird. So, if this was next Sunday or the previous Sunday, I could stay here talking for 3 hours. But I'm very happy to do this again as situation evolves. Thank you to everyone who dropped me a note in the chat, which as I speak, I wasn't able to reply to each, but it's very highly appreciated to all. Thank you all again. Thank you for organizing, Matt, and until the next happy occasion, onwards and upwards.
Onwards and upwards. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Thank you. Recording stopped.
All right, there you have it. Thank you all for tuning in to today's Rising Tide Foundation with an afternoon with Alex Krainer. I know I truly enjoyed it, and hopefully you did as well. A lot of valuable information there, and his insights are just truly invaluable to the discussion as we move forward this major economic, political, geopolitical reset that we're experiencing right now. And real quick, I also want to share with everyone that's tuning in right now. Let me bring this in the stream real quick. So I posted over in the Rogue Discord about an hour ago in regards to the hard fork that occurred with my previous efforts with the Gadfly multi-channel network. So we've decided at this point to really kind of part ways with the Series Report, and then also Ken Shortgun Jr. They're launching the Series Report 2 with their efforts. And then I'm basically taking the Gadfly, what was the Gadfly network, and changing it over to more of my efforts to really kind of rebrand media, changing the entire narrative of traditional podcasts and changing it to a lot more engaging, a lot more fluent back and forth between not only contributors, but also the audience. So I wanted to share, I put the link over in Discord, but basically what I've done at this point with the Gadfly multi-channel network is that I've removed all of the previous content from paywall. So right now you can go over to openmiccast.vhx.tv. I put the link in the description, and without anything, and this is going to go till December 1, you can listen to all previous discussions and some phenomenal discussions over there on the Gadfly with the Gadfly contributors. That includes our roundtables, some really classic discussions with Jim Willie that are posted over there. London Paul, Ken Shortgun, Roy Hall from the Daily Coin, interviews, open mic, so go through it. A lot of great, and I do that occasionally, go back and listen to some of those podcasts, because a lot of it in regards to, and that's what I love about all the people who have participated in our network, the accuracy with Jim Willie, with London Paul, with Ken, it's been spot on to where we are. So go, I put the link again over in Discord. You can go check it out. I'll post it again here real quick. The browse, go listen to those. It's, you can listen to it completely free. And then heading into January of 2023 is when I plan to get everything lined up in regards to what I'm building out in regards to my platform. And it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to be doing it. So thank you all for listening in on this Sunday afternoon. Also want to thank, there we go, got to remove. I also want to thank the Rising Tide Foundation, Matthew Arrett, for allowing me to simulcast today's Rising Tide Foundation discussion. I know I truly enjoyed it. Everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay safe and God bless, and we will see you on Monday. Thank you.